This is the notes video for Chapter 6, Lesson 3, Solve Equations with Rational Coefficients. Feel free to pause the video, rewind, or rewatch any parts at any time. Let's start with the real-world link. 3/4 of the students in Aaliyah's class belong to a social network. There are 15 students in her class that belong to a social network. 1. Create a bar diagram and shade 3/4 or 75/100 of it. So let's shade in 3/4 of the bar diagram. So if 3/4 of the students in Aaliyah's class belong to a social network, and 15 of those students is the 3/4. Label 15 along the bottom to show the amount of the bar that represents 15 students. 2. Based on the diagram, circle the equation that can be used to find C, the number of students in Aaliyah's class. So we're looking for something like 3/4 of C equals 15, or 75% of C equals 15, or 75/100 of C equals 15. Remember that of means multiply. So 75/100 C equals 15. Based on what you know about solving equations, explain how you could solve the equation you circled in exercise 2. 75/100 C actually means 75/100 times C. So after doing the last lesson, we know that we can use the division property of equality to solve this type of equation. This means that we'll divide 75/100 from both sides of the equation. So how many students are in Aaliyah's class? Let's use long division on the side to solve. 75/100 goes into 15 20 times. So there are 20 students in Aaliyah's class. Decimal coefficients. If a coefficient is a decimal, divide each side by the coefficient. In example 1, you can see that they solved 16 equals 25/100 n. They divided 25/100 from both sides of the equation using the division property of equality. They got 64 equals n. Then they substituted 64 back in for n and checked their solution. Let's try A, B, and C. 6 4/10 equal 8/10 times n. Notice that the coefficient is a decimal, so I need to divide by the coefficient on both sides of the equation using the division property of equality. I have to figure out what 6 4/10 divided by 8/10 is on the side. Notice that it gives us a division hint on the left side of the screen, division with decimals. Remember that when we move the decimal for the divisor, we have to move it for the dividend. The divisor is the number outside the house, and the dividend is the number inside the house. So I'm going to continue doing my long division on the side. I know that 8 goes into 64. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract, we get 0. And remember that since I moved the decimal for the divisor, I moved it for the dividend 1 to the right. So my decimal is after the 8. So 6 4/10 divided by 8/10 is just 8. So m equals 8. Moving on to B, negative 2 8/10 p equals 4 2/10. We have to divide each side by the decimal, negative 2 8/10. Negative 2 8/10 p divided by negative 2 8/10 is just p. And 4 2/10 divided by negative 2 8/10. I'm going to do some long division on the side, but my answer will be negative. So 4 2/10 divided by 2 8/10. 4 2/10 goes in the house, and 2 8/10 goes on the outside. So 2 8/10 is the divisor, and I have to move the decimal place to the right. So I have to do the same thing for the dividend, which is 4.2. My decimal will go above between the 2 and the 0. So 28 goes into 42 one time. 1 times 28 is 28. Subtract. 42 minus 28 is 14. Bring down the 0. 28 goes into 140 5 times. 5 times 28 is 140 exactly. Subtract, we get 0. Okay, so it's negative 1.5. For C, I have negative 4 7/10 K equals negative 10 81/100. I have to divide both sides by negative 4.7. I'll be using long division on the side to solve. Okay, after dividing using long division, I found that 4 7/10 goes into 10 81/100, 2 3/10 times. So my answer is K equals 2.3. So Jaya's coach agreed to buy ice cream for all the team members. Ice cream cones are $2.40 each. Write and solve an equation to find how many cones the coach can buy with $30. Let n represent the number of cones the coach can buy. So the number of cones times $2.40 is equal to 30. Then they divided, using the division property of equality, by 2.4 on both sides to get n by itself. 30 divided by 2.4 is 12.5. So since the number of ice cream cones must be a whole number, there is enough money for 12 ice cream cones. Let's see if we can try a problem like this. Suppose the ice cream cones cost $2.80 each. How many ice cream cones could you buy with $42? Let's divide both sides by the coefficient of 2.8. On the side, I'm going to use long division to solve 42 divided by 2.8. 2 8/10 goes into 42 15 times exactly. So the coach could buy 15 cones. Now we're going to be looking at what we do when we have a coefficient that's a fraction. So recall that two numbers with a product of 1 are called multiplicative inverses, or reciprocals. If the coefficient in a multiplication equation is a fraction, multiply each side by the reciprocal of the coefficient. As you can see in example 3, the coefficient is 3/4. So they multiplied by the multiplicative inverse, also known as the coefficient of 3/4, which is 4/3. They multiplied both sides by 4/3 using the multiplication property of equality. When they multiplied 12/20 by 4/3, they got an answer of x equals 4/5. Number 4 shows another example of a fraction as a coefficient. In order to solve these types of problems, you have to multiply both sides by the multiplicative inverse. So the multiplicative inverse of negative 7/9 is negative 9/7. The answer to 5/1 times negative 9/7 is negative 6 3/7. If you substitute back in negative 45/7 or negative 6 3/7, you can check your answer. Let's try E, F, and G. For E, our coefficient is 1/2. So we have to multiply by the multiplicative inverse, also known as the reciprocal. The reciprocal of 1/2 is 2/1, or just 2. Let's multiply both sides by 2. 1/2 x times 2 is just x. 8 times 2 is 16. For F, negative 3/4 x equals 9. Let's multiply both sides by the reciprocal of negative 3/4. The reciprocal of negative 3/4 is 4/3. When multiplying 9 times negative 4/3, I see that 9 and 3 both have a factor of 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1, 9 divided by 3 is 3. So now I can multiply and simplify easier. 3 times negative 4 is negative 12. So x equals negative 12. G, negative 7/8 x is equal to negative 21 over 64. Let's multiply both sides of the equation by the reciprocal of negative 7 over 8. As I'm multiplying, I'm looking for common factors diagonally. So 21 and 7 both have a factor of 7. 21 divided by 7 is 3. 7 divided by 7 is 1. Now I'm looking for a common factor between 64 and 8. They both share a factor of 8. 64 divided by 8 is 8. Negative 8 divided by 8 is negative 1. Now I can multiply across the top and across the bottom. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3, and 8 times 1 is 8. So x equals negative 3 over 8. Okay, here are the answers for E, F, and G. Here's our last example for lesson notes. Valerie needs 2/3 yards of fabric to make each hat for the school play. Write and solve an equation to find how many hats she can make with 6 yards of fabric. So 2/3 times the number of hats equals 6. In order to solve equations with the coefficient being a fraction, you have to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the fraction. This person multiplied both sides by 3 over 2. 3 over 2 times 6 is 9, so Valerie can make 9 hats. Notice on the side, you can also solve using a bar diagram.